Okay, our brother Adam Winfrey is exhorting us this morning on his title is Numbers, and he's asked us to read Psalm 23. That's Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me down to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So let's now give our attention to our brother Adam.
Good morning, everybody. Oops. My computer is 5 years old, but for some reason the battery's dead, so if it's not plugged in, well, the exhortation will be really short. So, good morning. Like look at you and say that. It's nice to see more people back. It's been really sunny outside. It's been really hot in the past couple weeks, and I really had to think, should I wear a long sleeve shirt? I think probably all the guys think, long sleeve short sleeve short on Sundays. I think last Sunday I wore shorts because it was so hot. And I'm still trying to register that it actually is summer. This summer feels a lot different than last. I'm sure all of us had summer plans last year that we were looking forward to that got postponed or canceled. And it's a little wild to think that just last summer, many vacation spots were either closed or had extremely tight restrictions. And we are blessed that this year is different. Julia and I are going to Myrtle Beach in a little over a month with my family. Is anyone else going to the beach this summer soonish? A few hands. Great. So we're going to talk about sharks for a second. As I said, my family is going to the beach in a month, and I've been going to Myrtle Beach every year, just about as far back as I can remember. We're creatures of habit, my family. My parents rent the same house every year, and they always get it the exact same week. And for a while there, just about every year we went, that week happened to coincide with the Discovery Channel's Shark Week. So I'm full of shark facts, and I have two facts that I want to share that I'll get to in a moment. And you might be thinking, why would you watch Shark Week while you're at the beach? I don't know. When I was a kid, I would also bring all the books I had about sharks with us to the beach to read. I only had two, but I brought them both. It was Eyewitness Sharks and Zoo Books. I don't know if anyone remembers the commercials for those. And I read them front to back on the way down. And I guess the reason I would bring the books down and watch Shark Week was I wanted to educate myself on the enemy. For example, in the zoo book, it suggested, it was a little gross, but it suggested that if you're ever attacked by a shark, that you should poke its eyes, hit its nose with a stick, or stick your hand in its gills to let it go. I wouldn't put my hands close to the shark's mouth, but I guess that's the only way. And that's shark fact number one. And I was really terrified of being attacked by a shark, and I still am. Younger me, and often sometimes older me, would thank God every night or at the beach in my prayers that nobody was attacked that day, and ask that no one would be attacked tomorrow as well. Now, Shark Week, on the other hand, it's the whole point of their programming isn't to terrify you, it's to educate you. Even before 1975, when Jaws came out, and there was that big shark scare, people were scared of shark attacks. But the people at the Discovery Channel want to show you that these creatures are an important part of God's creation. And if you get attacked, then you're either doing something extremely dumb or you're extremely unlucky. And actually, your odds of getting attacked by a shark are about 1 in 11.5 million in the United States. And since 1958, there've only been 1,200 recorded incidents of shark attacks, and only a fraction of those are fatal. For comparison, however, there are about 4.5 to 4.7 million dog bites every year in the United States. And the chances of you being struck by lightning, which is sort of like the famous comparison, are 1 in 500,000. And more applicable if you're going to the beach, every day, 9,500 people in the United States, not the world, just the US, are diagnosed with skin cancer. It's much more likely that you'll get skin cancer than you are to be bit by a shark. And in spite of this, every year when I dip my toes into the murky, waist-high tides of the vast Atlantic Ocean, I can't help but worry what might be swimming close by. So last year, I and probably everyone in this room, along with billions of others, was glued to the various daily statistics of COVID. Really early on, I was listening to an episode of a podcast I like called Radio Lab. I feel like every time I get up here, I talk about podcasts, but I didn't remember which one it was because there are so many podcasts that came out about coronavirus. And so I spent hours trying to dig, and I was actually surprised. It was released on March 27th, 2020. So that's how early on it was. And it was about 4 days after the lockdown in Virginia began. And it was one of the first of many that I obviously others listen to about the coronavirus. And that episode though stands out. In that episode, which was titled Numbers, they discussed how, especially then, back in March of 2020, how we were being flooded constantly with despairing numbers, and they paused to consider what it would be like if we were flooded with different numbers every day. What if every day we saw how many people did get attacked by a shark? If every day we saw how many people did get diagnosed with skin cancer, or how many people developed diabetes, or died of heart disease, or stroke? What if every day we paid attention to how many car accidents happened the day before? How many homes were lost to fire, or to flood, or how many jobs were lost? Would that change our daily habits? Would we work towards fixing the problem any faster like we did with COVID? Or rather, would we suddenly decide that these problems are problems that urgently need to be solved? That's a lot to think about. And it's not fun to think about. It's not fun to be flooded with those facts. But these are things that do actually happen. From a biblical perspective, we know that despite the numbers, despite the data, that God is in control, that God cares about his creation, that he cares about you and me, and everyone that we've ever or never met. He has the very numbers of your head numbered. He is actively aware of your troubles you're facing. And as Tim read for us in Psalm 23, David wrote, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." That attitude is what we inspire each other to have. And as Jesus said, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet our heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more valuable than they? Therefore, do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things. And your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And Jesus often told his disciples to have faith that God would take care of them. When Jesus sent out the 70 to preach, he told them not to bring food, money, or extra clothes, but to have faith that they'd be supplied with these things along the way. When the disciples didn't think there was enough to eat for the 5,000 or the 4,000, Jesus showed them a way. When they were caught in a storm and the disciples were panicking, Jesus told them that they needed to have more faith and calm the storm. And if they ever needed to express their faith, Jesus told the disciples that they would find the right words at that right moment. And before his crucifixion, before he ascended, Jesus told those closest to him that he would be sending the Helper, the Holy Spirit, as support directly from God. The reinforced message to them and to us from Jesus is that God is present in your life if you want him there. That thought, that faith can help believers through traumatic circumstances, especially when those circumstances are ever present and you are daily made aware of them. And that faith may not change the circumstances, but it can or should motivate your response. The Bible sometimes seems to have a lot more examples of what not to do rather than examples of what you should do. So one bad example, if you will, is Saul. Saul, as we know, was the first king of Israel. And his story that was that he was chosen by God. He was God's anointed to lead Israel when the people demanded a king. And he initially felt that he was very underqualified to be king and didn't want the job. But as time went on, he decided that he liked power and he liked being popular with his people. And he liked it so much that it became more important to him than what God wanted. And so God told him that someone else was going to be king instead of him. Now, at this point, Saul could have repented, and that may not have changed his punishment, but it could have changed the rest of the story. If and when he became aware of the person that was going to replace him, who turned out to be David, Saul could have nurtured him into being a better king than himself, to help David learn from his own mistakes and show him the ropes of leading the people. And also to transition the power from himself and his family over to David peacefully. Saul could have believed God, but done something good with that knowledge. And we know that's not what happened once Saul suspected David might be the next king. David wasn't trying to usurp Saul in the least bit, but Saul tried to put a stop to it. And this led to the death of himself and many of his sons, the loss of the Ark of the Covenant for a time, the death of many other innocents, and the fracturing of the nation for about a decade. And you can easily contrast Saul's actions to David. When David was told by God that he wasn't allowed to build the temple, which could have easily been the capstone of his legacy, David didn't do it. He listened. Instead, he got all the supplies ready for it and instructed his son what he needed to do to see the construction through. Another king who famously didn't listen to God was Pharaoh. Pharaoh obviously didn't share the faith of Moses, so it would have initially motivated his decisions. But even to his death and the death of many other in Egypt, he wouldn't listen. Or Jonah, who told God to preach to Israel's enemy, but Jonah decided he didn't want to. That plan very famously didn't work out for him. Or most famously and most apropos, Adam and Eve, not heeding God's warning about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. These are examples of people that had direct communication with God, who should have known exactly what God wanted out of them. Examples of people that made faith-based decisions without that direct line of communication are Esther, who risked her life to save her people from Ahab. Or Job, who through his faith, though his faith did need some refactoring, he decided not to get angry with God when his life went to ruin. Nehemiah recognized in the law that God had told Israel that if they returned to God, and they returned to their faith, if they confessed their sins, then God would restore Israel. And when Nehemiah perceived that happening, he asked the king of Persia permission to rebuild God's temple. Whatever our decisions are, they need to be faith-based. But the question that arose in the podcast wasn't how to make your decisions. It was, what would you do? It was, how would you live differently if you were presented with those facts daily? And we do have control of what our thoughts are. It's easy to ignore the bad stuff. When I listen to the podcast, my main takeaway is like, well, I just don't want to think about it, and I don't want to think about the bad things. And I think a lot of us stopped paying close attention to all the daily updates about COVID. After that, I definitely thought to myself, well, I'll taper that off. Because I think we were all very interested at the moment, but it was a lot. But it's just as easy to ignore the good as well. There are a lot of good things happening. There are a lot of good statistics. Julie wanted me to point out that about 10,000 babies are born in the United States every day. But if you're not a fan of babies, about 70,000 puppies and kittens are born every day. Yeah, each day about 2.7 million trees are planted in the US. The average adult will laugh about 20 times each day, so you have that to look forward to. Brother Tim checks in with about 5 people every day. That's one laugh. I made that one up, but you know, probably. 100 million Bibles are printed every year. The YouVersion Bible app reports that around 66,000 people around the world have the app open at any given second. And I was reminded of Philippians 4, verses 8 and 9. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. We are told to appreciate the good around us, not to be weighed down by the bad. And some proactive ways to do that are when you pray, either as a family or individually, thank God for something in particular that happened that day. And when I've done this myself, I tried to think of around 3 things, just because it gets me thinking and helps me reflect on some of the positive things in my day. And it could be anything at all, even something simple. Sometimes one of the things for me is like, I got Chipotle for lunch. On that note, we should enjoy the things that God has given us, and not only our possessions, but what we eat or drink, but more importantly, the people in our lives, our friends, our family, our brothers and sisters. And we should be thankful that we have each other, especially those of us who are good spiritual role models. And this is what the verse in Philippians is wanting us to direct our attention to, people that draw us closer to God. And we have easy access to the book telling us of the hope we have, and there are many supplemental books and people to guide you through understanding it. And if you look for them, there are little daily things in life that can remind us that God is taking care of us. And sometimes I've heard them referred to as God moments. On that topic, one of the details I appreciate in the story of Israel wandering around the wilderness is how in the beginning they grumble about food and water, and it's very relatable. And my dad gave an exhortation to Arlington a few weeks ago that I listened in on, and he said that they needed, for survival, if there are 2 million people, they needed 500,000 liters or gallons of water every day, which is about 10 water towers, if you see them around, or about the size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So it's a lot of water. And in the end, in Deuteronomy, they were obviously provided that. But in the end of Deuteronomy, Moses points out that just before they're about to go into the promised land, that their shoes and their clothes hadn't worn out in all those 40 years, which is something that, like, while you might be aware of that being a potential issue, they may not have considered at all. And I don't think about the hole in my sock until my sock falls apart. And who knows what else Moses didn't list there that they didn't or wouldn't ever think of. You'll find that you have the option to leave the little things as those sorts of little things as the little fortunate coincidences in your life, but it's in the very least uplifting to think of them as the little things from God. It's also important to attribute the good things to God, and that was Israel's slip up again and again. They neglected to recognize that God was taking care of them, and instead attributed their success to other things. And then something that reminded me and made me think about this last year is right in the beginning of the pandemic. Everything was like shutting down. Like we're all didn't know what was happening next. My biggest concern was food, because I like to eat. And I was afraid this, I talked to someone, they said, well, they're not going to shut them down because they're essential, but I was still afraid. So I ran to Target and I bought as many seeds as I could possibly buy, which was like $10 because I wasn't going overboard. And I went home and I tore up the side of my yard that weeds and whatnot were growing on, and I planted seeds, and I took all the pots I had and I filled them with garden soil, and I planted tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers and anything, because I thought, well, I'm going to need to feed Julie and me, because who knows. And luckily, I didn't need to, because about 3 months later, I finally got one grape tomato, and that was my harvest. Just the fact that we can go to the grocery store, because for people like me that aren't green thumbs, I would have gone hungry. I'd be a lot thinner, which could have been good for my wedding. But anyway, the other half of that passage in Philippians deserves as much emphasis. Again, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. And we can't ignore the bad things going on in the world. And when I say that, I'm considering primarily the parable of the sheep and the goats. To summarize, it's when Jesus tells his disciple that those who would enter the kingdom were the ones that saw their brothers and sisters and neighbors in need and helped them. And we have the leisure of easy access to information to tell us how we can help. A lot of the statistics I listed at the beginning of my exhortation are out of our control. You can't change how many people are going to get sick tomorrow. But for example, one of the things that podcast also listed was how much trash is created every day, which is estimated to be about 6 million tons. And that's something that you can, in a small way, affect. If you want to help the environment, you can plant one of those 2.7 million trees. You could plant flowers for bees. You could eat less meat. It isn't the most important thing as a servant of God to care about the environment, but it is his world and not ours, his creation, and we abuse it. What is more important, though, and what Jesus actually directed us to do, is taking care of each other. There are those of us among us who we know are sick, who are lonely, who may not be naked and hungry, as Jesus said, but could use a helping hand. But there are also plenty of people that are quiet about their ailments. I know, because I'm one of those people. I like to talk about my problems. or they don't have a chance to say anything because no one asks. Not only are we responsible for each other's well-being, but it's something that we should want to do. It's something that we should do without thinking about it. And if any of you came to me looking for aid, I shouldn't hesitate to help. In fact, I should be proactively looking to help. Because we know we have the leisure of easily finding out, at least, that 7% of Americans have depression, that 39,000 Central Virginians, according to a local food bank, struggle with hunger, or 38 million Americans in 2019, which is 10% of our population, were on food stamps or SNAP. 61% of adults before the pandemic suffered from loneliness frequently. Or that 51% of Americans are absolutely terrified of getting attacked by a shark. These are things that we can help if we just try. Just talk to each other and care about each other. It doesn't take a lot. What if we were presented with those numbers every day? What if we regularly thought about how many people might need us? What if we saw those numbers every day and they started to go down? And not because a medical company developed a treatment or scientists figured out world hunger, but because you and I were being better disciples of Christ. Thank you.